Okay, Charlotte.
I think she must have lost connection, Chair. I'm just calling her now.
Yeah. Can
Oh, there we
everyone
are. Yeah, we can now, Charlotte.
Sorry, thank you. Apologies, I was on mute. That was my error. So I'm just going to start this meeting for this afternoon. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the joint meeting of Cabinet, Streetscene and Engineering Scrutiny Committee. My name is Charlotte and I am the Scrutiny Officer for this meeting. Just to make you all aware, today's meeting will be recorded. Can I also welcome members of the public and press to today's meeting? Can I kindly ask you to observe the meeting only and not speak or participate? Can I please remind you all to switch your phones to silent for the duration of the meeting? In addition, can I refer you to the protocols for remote meetings, which have been previously circulated, namely your microphones should be switched to mute unless you are speaking. I will shortly take a roll call at the start of this meeting of all members and officers. Should you wish to ask a question or make a comment, can you please indicate either via the chat function or by raising your electronic hand via Teams. I will assume that you have all read the paperwork before us today prior to the meeting. When asking a question, can you please indicate which page number you are also referring to? And when speaking, please introduce yourself. Before we go to the agenda, I will firstly take a roll call. I will go through members of the committee first, cabinet members, and then officers. So I have had apologies from Councillor Angharad Aubrey. So then if I go to Councillor Rosalind Davis. Councillor Davis.
Present. Presennol.
Councillor Sharon Freegard.
Present.
Councillor Charlotte Goldsworthy.
Present.
Councillor Wyndham Griffiths.
Present.
Councillor Joe Hale.
Present, Charlotte.
Apologies from Councillor Mike Harvey. Councillor Nigel Hunt.
Apologies, Charlotte.
Thank you. Councillor Steve Hunt.
I'm here, Charlotte.
Councillor Jeremy Hurley.
Present, thank you.
Councillor Chris Jones.
Present.
Councillor Dennis Keogh.
Present.
Councillor Simon Noyle. No. Councillor Alan Llewellyn.
I do, Charlotte, yes, present.
Adam McGrath.
Present, Charlotte.
Sandra Miller.
Present, Charlotte.
Councillor Rydian Maisen.
Yeah, Charlotte.
Councillor Del Morgan.
Yeah, present.
Councillor Suzanne Patterson.
Present.
Councillor Sheila Penry.
Present.
Councillor Lynette Purcell.
Present.
Councillor Saifra Harman. I've had apologies from him as well. Apologies. Councillor Sonia Reynolds.
Present.
Councillor Rob Wood.
Present.
Councillor Arwyn Wilcock.
Yeah, present, Charlotte.
If I just move on to cabinet members now, Councillor Rob Jones.
Yes, I'm here, Charlotte.
Councillor Edward Latham.
Yeah, present, Charlotte.
Councillor Carol Clement Williams.
Present, Charlotte.
Councillor Doreen Jones.
Present, Charlotte.
Councillor Alan Lockyer.
Present, Charlotte.
Peter Rees.
Present, Charlotte.
Councillor Peter Richards.
Present, Charlotte.
Bingrave.
Present, Charlotte.
Councillor Leanne Jones.
Present, Charlotte.
If I move to officers, Karen Jones.
Present, Charlotte.
Will Jenkins.
Present.
Aled Evans.
Charlotte, I'm covering Aled. It's Andrew here.
Oh, thanks, Andrew. Andrew Jarrett.
Yeah, present, Charlotte.
Griffiths.
Present, Charlotte.
Griffiths.
Present, Charlotte.
Thank you. Peter Jackson.
Present, Charlotte.
Jane Woodman Ralph.
Present.
Have I missed anyone at all that's participating in this meeting today? No. There we are. So if I can move to item 1 on the agenda, which is to appoint a chairperson and a vice chairperson, can I please have a proposer for a chair?
I propose Councillor Wood.
Thank you. And can someone second that, please?
I'll second that, Charlotte.
Thank you. Can Councillor Rob Wood, can you please undertake role as chair, please?
Thank you, Charlotte. Can I please have a proposer for vice chair?
I propose Councillor Paddison.
And a seconder, please.
I second that.
Okay, thank you very much. Moving on to item 2, which is a chairperson's announcement. Firstly, I'd like to thank all those that are and have attended the flooding incident that we've had within the county borough, and I'd like to offer them all the committee's thanks. Okay, going on to item 3, which is declarations of interest. Are there any? I have none. Item 4, which is the Bus Emergency Scheme 2. If I could ask Peter Jackson or Dave Griffiths to give us a summary of the report, which will be for decision later. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. Yes, as members can see, it's a very detailed and comprehensive report that's before you today, which is linked with the bus emergency scheme that has been introduced as a result of COVID at the beginning of last year. So obviously, I don't need to explain to members how badly affected the bus services have been affected as a result of the pandemic. But to just put some context to the proposals, Welsh Government, prior to the COVID pandemic, proposed changes to the way that bus services would be delivered in Wales. And some members will recall that a bus bill was due to have been brought forward during the current Senedd term. Now, pressures associated with COVID has meant that a large volume of legal work, coupled with the Brexit transition, has forced or has resulted in that bill being delayed and not being able to be laid before Parliament. But nevertheless, as there's such a large amount of public funding that goes into bus services, the Welsh Government and local authorities would like to see the public sector having greater influence over the areas such as the bus networks and services provided, ticketing and integration across the board and with rail services. And members will also be aware of the recently set up
I think we've got a slight hiccup there. I don't know if Mr. Peter Jackson could come in possibly to carry on.
Yeah, I think where David was going with this was that recently set up Transport for Wales, which now includes bus. So Welsh Government are working very closely with that. And as David was alluding to, they've given a lot of support, firstly with Bus Emergency Scheme 1, then Bus Emergency Scheme 1.5. Each scheme in turn had some criteria they put on the buses to make them more accountable for the public purse money they were getting given to support their organisations as they were delivering the services with, as you'd be aware, nobody really travelling on buses because the stay-at-home message. What this report is doing is asking for the BES2 agreement to be agreed to in principle. Now, this is a little bit more significant than the previous agreements with a lot more conditions in there for the bus operators. For ourselves, it's mainly administration of the back office and to get cabinet agreement for us to agree to this in principle. I will take any questions on this in Dave's absence, and that is about where we. Sorry, Dave. I've gone through. I'll just fill Dave in where we've got to, and I've just said, but TFW, I assume you were going to talk about, and that the BS1 and the BS and the hardship funding, and that we're at BS2, which is significantly different from the others, which is why we need cabinet approval to sign up to it in principle.
All right, okay, you've got apologies for my loss of connection. Yes, as Peter said, there were two issues that were associated with the BES scheme. Basically, the short-term survival of operators and the longer-term reform of the sector. So Peter has described the sort of support packages that have been introduced since last March and through to September last year. So yes, in principle, we're asking Cabinet and Cabinet Scrutiny to consider signing up to the principle of the Bus Emergency Support Scheme 2, and that we enter into dialogue and a partnership arrangement with a lead authority for the region, which we will need to enter into with both Welsh Government, bus operators, TFW and ourselves. So I won't go into any more detail on the report. I'm mindful that we've had several questions submitted by members. So if I can pass you back to the chair, and perhaps we can go into the detail of answering some of those queries.
Thanks both. I've got a number of questions for you. And what if you can do that might make things easier is if you decide amongst yourselves who wants to take the particular question.
Okay.
I'll state and ask them to state their name when they come in asking the questions then. And as they ask the question, you can decide who to answer between yourselves. Okay then. If I can bring in first, Councillor Suzanne Patterson.
Oh, thank you, Chair. I did explain in the pre-brief that I owe Peter Jackson some thanks because I phoned him with a question, and then other members of the committee in the pre-brief said they would be very interested to hear the question that I asked. So I'm going to go ahead with that. I initially contacted Mr. Jackson regarding the statement on the IAA that there are no implications for the Valley communities, and I wondered why that was true. I would ask him again that question and he will give an answer. But in the course of the conversation, also, I basically asked Mr. Jackson, what is the benefit for this council in signing into this agreement? And I know the answers are on page 17 and 18, but in the course of his conversation with me, I had a much clearer picture. So if I could ask Mr. Jackson then to just relay to the committee the answers that he gave to me yesterday on the phone, please.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, this is more about the administration and the background, what's going on in the background at the moment, which is why it'll have no Valley's impacts as such. As I've put into one of our responses previously to Welsh Government, the devil will be in the detail, and when we get more detail, we will obviously bring back further papers to make members aware. But the BS2 agreement is getting the operators, we'll have more influence with the operators on bus service and how we'd like them to operate in the future. As members will be aware, they have withdrawn service quite regularly from various areas, and this will give us some modicum of control over it and where we can challenge them on their decisions. I'm trying to cast my mind back to yesterday now. If Councillor Patterson could refresh me on the bits you just made.
It was just, I mean, we did have quite a long conversation, didn't we? We covered quite a lot, but I'm trying to sum it up. And basically, it was the benefits for the council of this scheme rather than anything in specific terms. I know we talked
right,
at
okay.
length, and that was the reason why I phoned you, because I know it takes up a lot of time in committee. So.
By signing up to the BS2 agreement, as I say, it will give us some modicum of control over what we're asking bus operators to do. At the moment, we subsidise local bus services for valleys or rural communities or anywhere that's not commercially viable. And indeed, this could actually be places sort of like Baglan I'm thinking of at the moment, don't have bus services. With this agreement in place, for the money they get in, we can develop partnerships where we'd be saying, in my interpretation, if you're getting this amount of money, we expect this level of service. We're already working with the consultants Welsh Government have employed on the strategic bus network, and we're having a meeting in the middle of February, looking what our ideal network would look like, which I can assure you from an office point of view, we'll get as much as we can out of this. And then hopefully there will be less necessity to subsidise specific routes, whereas we'll have a more all-encompassing network that will work for the council, work for Transport for Wales, and work for the public mainly, because they're the ones that use the vehicles.
Thank you.
Does that cover about everything? Yep.
Yeah, that's about right.
Sorry.
Thank you, Chair.
Right. Next question is from Councillor Alan Llewellyn.
Diolch yn fawr, Cadeirydd. Thanks, Chair. Councillor Nigel Hunt Aberafan has sent apologies for this meeting, but he wanted to have a question raised. So I wonder if I can ask Nigel's question first and then come to the questions that I submitted in advance, if that's okay with you, Chair.
Yeah, certainly.
There we are. And Nigel did indicate to committee section in advance, so the officers might be aware of it. He was raising the point that, as well as bus and transport providers having had a particularly difficult time during COVID, that several other sectors have as well, including retail sectors and hospitality and so on. And he was raising the question, perhaps as part of this framework, whether buses, as they are very visible, obviously, could be used to help promote various destinations for the time when these can be open again. So he was pointing out that he's giving examples such as Neath Market, Aberafan Shopping Centre, pointed out when the surrounding valleys, that is a good way of drawing attention to the fact that there are businesses in those areas, and also perhaps promoting the concept of people using the buses to reach those destinations. So that was Nigel's question. So perhaps if I can pause there and I can come back with my own questions then. Thanks.
Could I come back with that?
Yeah.
Chair? Peter
Yes.
Jackson. What we've got at the moment, the buses are all commercial. Currently, they can purchase space on the back of the buses to advertise whatever they want. So you've probably seen they promote their own services, and a lot of the time they've got on is recruitment for drivers. But I believe, sort of we could look at getting the information for the individual shops and that, but I'm not sure, because they're commercial companies, where they'd be putting stuff on their buses free, if you understand what I mean. They're there to make money, they're commercial bus services, but the spaces on the back of the buses are used for advertising currently.
Yes, thanks, Chair. I think the reason that Nigel was asking the question is obviously under BS2 and presumably future frameworks arising out of it, the relationship between the local authorities and the buses are going to change. So it's almost a sort of a quid pro quo that, as part of the package that bus companies and bus operators will be supported, that's something coming back is to help actually promote other sectors and destinations within the county borough. So I think that's the context of his question. So certainly they're sort of almost entirely commercial at the moment, but obviously that relationship will actually change.
Yeah, and that is something we could put forward as officers, that, sort of to promote people. I know the Welsh Government are currently looking at working groups to how to get people to catch buses again. and that's one idea that could be put forward.
Thanks very much indeed. So Chair, if it's okay with the
certainly carry
one of
on.
the other questions submitted in advance. If I ask all of them, and if that's more convenient. The first of all, I mean, I welcome the principle that the Welsh Government and local authority input will be increasing under this proposed new framework, and that there will be improved planning. Is there any update on the meeting between Lee Waters, the Deputy Minister, and the WLGA bus member group, which the report notes took place last Monday, if that went ahead? The second question is, will the proposals have any effect on concessionary fare arrangements, or will they stay the same? The third question is, will the proposals move us forward towards interchangeable ticketing between bus companies? And then I have a question on the delayed tendering process. One of my concerns expressed at Scrutiny last month about the tender process which was due for this year was that passenger data would be out of date, as some of the affected services had changed since the last exercise. And of course, all passenger numbers are currently very low because of the pandemic. Do we know the basis on which services will be retendered at the end of BS2? And just picking up on what Peter said earlier, would that be part of the discussions in February on the future of routes and packages? And then my final question is, can there be early cross-boundary discussions with other local authorities within the BS2 framework where services cross county boundaries? For instance, starting from Swansea and end up beneath Talbot, or starting in Powys and coming into our area. Very often the cross-boundary consultations or communications tend to be a little bit late in the day, and if we're all part of the same framework, will we be making sure that there's early communication to make sure that we're all trying to be on the same line, maximising benefits cross-boundary for communities? Thanks.
David Griffiths, I can see you had your hand up. It was just to answer the questions, is it?
Yeah. Yes, if I take Councillor Llewellyn's first three questions, and then Peter will come in and answer the questions around tendering and the cross-border service provision. If I start with the WLGA bus member group, I'm going to refer to my notes because it was quite a long meeting and a great deal was discussed. But the Deputy Minister was keen to stress that Welsh Government wanted to work in partnership with local authorities. I can advise that it was a constructive first meeting where Wales Government were able to present their views on what their view of the way forward was. Members at the meeting expressed their views around the need for local authority influence, and at the same time recognise the key roles for the region. The future legislation in this area is still a possibility, especially if the proposed partnership arrangements with operators around the BES2 don't deliver. So you will see in the report that it's until the end of July 2022. If we don't get results from that, then government could legislate changes in that area. The meetings are going to continue, Councillor Llewellyn, with meetings with members every 6 weeks. It's fair to say that everyone recognised that the deregulated market is now creaking, and the objective of the old 1985 Act now conflicts with the key aims of integration of the bus network with rail and other key elements such as ticketing and information that has been referenced. Government has been paying multiple operators to compete with each other on commercial routes through the BSSG and the concessionary fares, particularly in our urban environment and town centres. It's fair to say, as you know, the funding regime is complex, patronage is in decline, and COVID has exposed some flaws now in the system. And of course, there was reference to social exclusion insofar as 78% of people who use bus services do not have access to a car. The Minister recognised that local authorities are the starting point for public transport and have a key role in shaping place, listening to the communities and holding the bodies to account. That includes Welsh Government, whether it be regional or national. Again, the Minister explained the government's objective to provide access for all. He talked about the response to the climate change and to create a sustainable public transport network. The 4 regions across Wales will have a key role playing, building on its previous good practice and holding to account Transport for Wales on the development of the bus service network that's proposed. He also highlighted, and you picked up about advertising earlier, but he was keen that it includes the role of SMEs in this bus network and investment in the rural areas. In terms of the role of TfW, he made reference to the ticketing, journey planning system, market information, that all need to be developed going forward as part of this BES2 agreement. The Minister Waters felt that there needed to be a decoupling of the two, but he is proposing to issue another document for members to review around the rural dimension and the bus networks. Funding is obviously critical, and ensuring that that funding will be sustainable going forward. Then Julie James also offered some input regarding the relationships between what will become the future corporate joint committees, and how those plans will be taken forward both in the planning, housing and transport sectors. Obviously, Minister James suggested it would be for local authorities and regions to determine where best to deliver, and that there were no rigid borders in this respect. So as a region, we are in discussions about what functions could be devolved to the region linked with the corporate joint committees. Finally, on this point, some members offered their views that they felt they didn't agree with a centric model, that it would be controlled from Cardiff and by Welsh Government, and that the regions and local authorities would be a key part of the new model, and very much favoured a hybrid solution in that respect. The Minister then concluded the session, noting that the feedback from the 4 regions and 22 authorities, that local authorities were reasonably content at this stage in supporting the direction of travel, and hopefully the principles of the BES2 agreement would be supported for the next 2 years. So that's in response to your first question, Councillor Llewellyn. I know it was a very detailed one, and please be assured the next ones are much shorter. Your question around will the proposals have any effect on concessionary fare arrangements? There will be no changes that will affect the travelling public. However, as Peter alluded to, there will be some changes around the administration arrangements, and we're obviously in dialogue as part of a voluntary partnership agreement what that administration service will look like. In terms of your question regarding interchangeability of ticketing between companies, this is something that we've tussled with as local authorities for some time. Now, this is one thing that Welsh Government and Transport for Wales are very keen on achieving, and it's only with sort of government intervention can we achieve these. It's not something that we can do as individual local authorities with the sector. So I'm hoping that there will be change in that area. So if I can pass you on now to Peter for the last two items regarding the tendering concerns and also about the cross-border discussions, particularly with Powys, who are, they face every region practically in every county. So Peter.
Thank you.
Thank you. The tendering, you know, we've had notice from Welsh Government that at the moment anybody that's putting tenders out could face significant increases in the prices because the operators will put in for loss of fare box as well. At the moment, they only get the concessionary fare, so that's quite a concern that we don't want to tender for something that we're currently paying X amount and it triples because we've gone out now. They are going to be issuing guidance coming forward. We're also in the, as I mentioned earlier, that we're looking at the regional transport network with the consultants that Transport for Wales have employed to undertake this work, the strategic network. And obviously, if we can highlight things there, perhaps some of the routes we're currently subsidising won't necessarily have to be subsidised. For the regional work, we work closely with Swansea, Carmarthen and Pembrokeshire. We have monthly transport officers meetings with that, and at a slightly higher level, I believe members and heads. Powys, however, in a separate county, in a county on their own actually, because it's such a large county, and sometimes it's quite difficult to engage with them. We have had some cause for concerns when they have implemented something their side or haven't implemented something their side, which has detrimentally affected services to certain areas, not in Neath, Talbot, I might add. But it's gone to quite a high level to get it resolved. Hopefully going forward, especially when we get the joint committees, because the way they'll work, we'll have input into the committees, our committee resolved. We're already sort of discussing in-house about the issues that, like you say, where Powys and Neath Talbot meet. We've got quite a few services that touch there, and we are going to speak to the consultants that we need to be engaged with Powys to try and get better services in these areas.
Thanks, Peter and David there for a very comprehensive response. And before I bring anybody else in for questioning, if a lot of what you were going to question was answered with those responses, if you could tailor your questions to, you know, to the points that haven't yet been made and the responses that haven't been given, that would be great. Thanks. If I could bring in Councillor Steve Hunt, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and I'll take on board what you have just said. Can I just first thank Peter and David, as you quite rightly said, for this comprehensive report here today. I'm certainly in favour of the recommendations outlined in the report. Apologies in advance, but I will try not to ask questions as Councillor Llewellyn have asked, but sometimes they overlap a little bit, so they're not quite the same. But on page 6 is that statement with regards to the member group, and everybody can read it and see who is part of that member group. I just wondered on that group, I noticed there's feedback to members, and I thank David for the information he gave, but I don't see any bus user groups part of this conversation, or while we get reports back, I just wondered where our councillors, like myself, who represent rural wards, have the ability to feed into the conversations, so that decisions that are dealt with get all the information that they might need to come back with a particular outcome that meets everybody's needs. So that's sort of a question on the group itself, because I sat, as you know, Chair, in pre-briefing, I've sat on First Cymru bus user groups, and I know some of the information from those people who use the service is more important than perhaps the professionals then, as I would say, that is outlined there. So that's just that one. My second question then is regards to on page 11, and I think it's C on that paragraph, where the operators can challenge the local authority's ability to let new contracts on routes where the operator have registered a commercial service. It goes on to say about standards to be specified as part of BEST to provide an objective way to defend the local authority's right to let a supported contract where the service offered by the operator does not meet the specific standard. Legal advice and guidance would be provided local authorities support statement. The point I'm making on that is that where are we going forward with transport? As Rob would say, the leader, it's transport for the public. And I know he tongue-in-cheek mentioned Bob's buses. Now, I think sometimes as we move forward, we've discussed this before, transport is very complex, Chair. And as we know, it's not coronavirus or just coronavirus that has caused issues for this service currently. This was already there prior to COVID. We need to be reminded of that, that we need a better public transport industry and service for us all. So the last point within that report or concept of that is regarding the community transport. As you know, if there's a decline in bus use, then the smaller operators perhaps can pick up certain parts of the service. And we know we have Dancer as part of Neath and Talbot. But I just wondered, is there a drive or determination or a will or a legal ability to have, sorry, I'll mention Bob's buses again, but it's quite an important, when we look long-term longevity, it's important that we get this right for all our communities, and especially where it's affected more, as touched on by David earlier, in the rural wards that I and many other councillors represent. Thank you for your patience, Chair, and I believe I sort of covered that in my questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Hunt. Who's going to take this?
We probably have a bit of a mixed bag on this one. There's a lot of points raised by Councillor Hunt, but if I can start on the first one in terms of consultations, Welsh Government and Transport for Wales are obviously leading on the bus network review and the BES. They have been in full consultation with the main operators, but there has been some criticism levied that they haven't spoken to the smaller operators, and they are in the process of having further dialogue with those companies. In terms of local members flagging queries, obviously you can do that via Peter and myself, and of course we know a lot of the concerns of local members, and then we can take it to our regional forum where Peter, myself and Councillor Latham, as our transport forum lead for the authority, can feed that into the process. But the sort of framework that they have is set out there. We've got regional chairs of the transport forum. Councillor Latham was the regional chair, and I was the officer lead last year. This year, Councillor Baker in Pembrokeshire is the chair. So we pass our concerns and any queries that we have via Councillor Baker, and he feeds those into the system at this WLGA level. Of course, we've got the added benefit at Neath Talbot in that Councillor Latham is the deputy chair spokesperson at the WLGA on transport. So we're fortunate actually in Neath Talbot that we've got two 2 people in the meeting that can represent the council on this in those forums. If I turn to your query on page 11 and the legal interventions where challenge can be made, obviously this is the devil is in the detail on this, and by that the BES is proposing that there'll be quality partnership arrangements. There could be potential franchising arrangements with the region. But moreover, I think where we want intervention is where the operators may turn round and say, well, we're not going to deliver a Sunday service, or we're not going to deliver, because of the patronage, services in the evenings or early morning to get people to work. And that's where we can perhaps step in and direct the operators to maintain the services if public money is going to be continued to be passed in their direction. So, Peter, was there anything I've missed or you'd like to add to the queries?
The only thing I'd like to add, there's a couple of little points that Councillor Hunt brought up, which are quite valid. Currently, we can't subsidise one of our buses on a commercial bus route. If it's commercial, we can't go against it. They are looking at changing things. Not that we necessarily would go against it, but if currently you've got an hourly service and we could say we wanted a half-hourly service, you could do that. TfW are already piloting schemes down in Pembrokeshire and up in North Wales and in, I think it's RCT, on running their own buses to feed into the main bus services. So to answer your question, the likes of Dancer could easily be taking part of their services to feed into the to feed into the TfW network. So there are things afoot, and the strategy that was requested a couple of weeks ago, the Wales Transport Strategy, outlines quite a lot of what they're looking at, which should answer the questions. But you know, it will be a good thing if we got slightly more regulation of the buses.
Okay. If I could
Chair,
ask...
Chair, just briefly, one quick comeback. When I mentioned in relationship to the authority, and you mentioned another authority might be able to do it, Peter or David, is there a potential going forward in what is being discussed about local authorities having their own transport network services? It may be difficult. I know you've been asked it before. That one wasn't answered, Chair. Sorry. Just okay. A bit of an update on that one, if I may. Thank you, Chair.
Did we come back
Peter,
here?
do you want to come in on that?
Yeah. Yeah, I would say that running our bus service would be expensive. However, now community transport buses to deliver. The 26, they were doing the X5 in the evening until COVID hit. So there are opportunities out there. And Transport for Wales, who've got this working group, or consultants, I should say, will be looking at all opportunities to integrate as much transport as they can.
Okay.
Can I just add to Peter's commentary that obviously I mentioned a paper earlier that the Deputy Minister is looking at the rural dimension. It'll be interesting to see what comes out of that discussion, but I know that, that there may be changes to how we operate, that there may be more demand responsive and taxi services in rural communities. And of course, we'd love to push for a bus to each community every hour. Now, that's a real aspiration. It's something we'll enter into further dialogue with them, but we hope there'll be a blended solution to maintaining and improving services in our valley communities, Councillor Hunt.
That's good to hear, David Griffiths. If I can bring in Councillor Lynette Purcell with her question, please.
Thank you very much. I think some of what I'm about to ask has been answered, but there's a few things I just want clarification on because this is not an area of my expertise at all. But on page 17, it says the BES2 arrangements are seeking to ensure that operators are incentivized, what a lovely word, to support the recovery of the whole network and not just a limited number of commercial routes. Now, what I'm really looking for is the office's opinions about how confident we can be that this is going to happen. Because even in the debate that we've heard so far, I've heard Peter talking about having some modicum of control, but David's talking about how we can direct them to do things, which is not the same at all. We also had mention of services that we have been subsidising prior to all of this. And Peter knows on a personal level in my ward that even the services that we have been subsidising have been so unreliable that my communities have stopped using them. And therefore we get this, they're not using it, so they're losing it because they've not been using it because they've not been able to rely on it. So what I would just like assurances on is, do we think this is going to work as far as the providers are concerned? Will things improve for our communities? And crucially, what happens if it doesn't? Thank you for that.
Okay, I don't know who's taking that one.
Thank you, Councillor.
Leave Dave answer that one.
Thank you, Councillor Purcell. Yeah, no, the points you make are all very valid, and it is going to be challenging. But at the end of the day, there is a huge amount of money that's going into bus services across Wales, and as you know, none of us think we're having best value from that. The BES2 agreement will aim to tackle that, but as I said earlier, if the operators don't flex and don't work with the authorities and giving us an assured network for the community, then that's when Welsh Government may step in and legislate on that position. So I think that's where Peter mentioned that previously, that you know, the deregulated industry now has to change, and if we want the public to use and make the public bus services sustainable, then they've got to have a reliable and frequent service. Without that, it's destined to fail. So the other thing is that Welsh Government are saying that funding is a key element. They have put more money into this area for next financial year. So I am hopeful that we see some benefits from that. Of course, nothing is guaranteed. We will work very hard to secure those services. And as Peter mentioned, we've got ARUP commissioned with TFW that are currently reviewing that network. They're scheduled to meet with Neath Talbot shortly, and we'll be raising all of our concerns and what we'd like to see as a resilient network for the authority. No doubt they'll go away and cost all of that to see where that resilient network can be achieved, and then we'll be falling back to see the community transport operators, the car schemes, and the demand responsive services. So we get an overall solution to the transport problems that we've been having.
Okay, Councillor Purcell. I've got Councillor Sonia Reynolds next with a question.
A lot of what I was concerned about has been covered, thank you, Chair, but I did want to say, as some of the points were related to the valleys, and it's become clear throughout the meeting that the valleys might possibly see benefit in other areas with bad or difficult service provision at the moment. When we do the impact assessment, perhaps if officers could in general put in that there is a benefit there, that there is an enhancement, not just that there's no impact. it would be useful. It would stop questions.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. I've got Councillor Sharon Freegard with a question.
Oh, thanks, Chair. It goes back to control and influence, really, and I just wondered how much influence we would have if the scheme, once getting embedded, was flexible enough for us to change certain routes depending on need, and obviously how we could penalise, what influence we would have should they not conform, really. It's going back to Suzanne Patterson's question and Peter Jackson's response.
Peter, do you want to come in on
come in, Dave?
Yeah. So, yes, if you don't mind.
Well, as we're saying, that we've got the BES2 agreement. We've got to get the operators to sign up to it. The devil will be in the detail, you know, sort of, we will be putting down agreements with them of what we'd expect to deliver and the standards they are expected to stick to deliver that. They are getting funding at the moment from about 4 or 5 different sources. They get the subsidised bus network, they get life kilometre support grant, they get concessionary fare reimbursement. At the moment, they get in the bus emergency scheme, which is what we're talking about now, to uplift them for loss of fare box. I think what it'll be, if I'm completely honest, is a bit like a carrot and a stick, you know, sort of, that we'd like them to do this, and we will work with the operators, you know, sort of, because it will give us more control with the BES2 to say, well, if you were operating that, we'd like this. At least we've got something we can put towards them, saying you've got the benefit of this route. And I'll give you an example from down your way, Port Talbot to Swansea. And yet, you know, sort of, we need something around the Sandfields a bit more frequent or something like that. At the moment, we don't have that much control. They put their commercial services in, and where it's not commercial, deemed not commercial by the operator, I should say, they tend to reduce the service or withdraw the service altogether, which is what we've got no control over. I don't know if that answers your question.
Thanks very much,
if they
Peter.
Yeah, I was just going to say, if they deem that it's not unnecessary, you know, do we have enough influence to make sure that they still comply?
Currently, we don't. Hopefully, with the BS2, we will.
Okay. If I can bring in Councillor Suzanne Patterson then, please.
Oh, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to draw members' attention to the recommendations on page 12, and that this, when you do come to recommendations, that we will be agreeing for a maximum term to end on the 31st of July. So obviously, lots of members have got questions. There will be a further report on item D on the recommendation, a further report to come back for bus reforms. This is not the end result. This is just taking the council into the BS2 so that we can give delegated authority to our senior officers to enter into that relationship. So I would just like to say, you know, we're not going to sort everything out today. This is just for a recommendation to be in it. You've got to be in it to participate in it. And that's basically what I wanted to say.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. It's like, you know, we could be back here discussing the bus emergency services 2.5, you know. Right, I haven't got, I've got one more indication. Councillor Del Morgan.
Thank you, Chair. Can I ask, please, who are the regional lead authorities and how are they selected?
Okay, shall I could take that, Chair. As it stands, since 2013, we've had City and County of Swansea that act as the regional bankers for the funding arrangements, and Carmarthenshire are the lead in terms of administration. Now, below that, our transport sections across the 4 local authorities have work very, very closely. They meet monthly in terms of supporting that arrangement. The Regional Transport Forum debated this subject matter, and because this has come at us at short notice, well, fairly short notice, just before Christmas, that there were some principal changes in the way that this would work. the regional members felt for continuity purposes and for the actual existing officers involved, that we would continue or support the similar arrangement. So as it stands, we are asking the City of County of Swansea, who are prepared to take on the lead for BS2, to become the lead authority for the Southwest region. So officers and members were sort of on the same page on that. It just made things a little bit easier in continuity terms. So it'll be City and County of Swansea as the lead. But the 4 teams are yet now to work up the voluntary partnership agreement. That was shared by Welsh Government last week. And it's fair to say that the regions and all of our legal colleagues will be reviewing that document line by line before we sign up, to make sure that we are satisfied that we've got that we're comfortable with those working arrangements. I mean, the region, I'm pleased to say that regional officers and actually all the cabinet members for transport have got very good working relationships, and we're able to resolve any differences amicably. I think that's fair to say. I don't know if Councillor Latham wants to make any comment around that. But yeah, Councillor, it'll be City and County of Swansea will be the lead for the BES2.
Thanks, David. Councillor Latham, have you anything to add?
Thank you, Chair. I wasn't going to come in, Chair. I think everything has been covered, and the comments from members have been well made. Yes, I mean, Dave is right about the lead authority and everything he said there. But I think Councillor Patterson is right as well. When you read what the 4 recommendations are, we're not signing anything away here. It's for further discussion. I mean, why wouldn't we agree for financial support, albeit conditional, to the bus sector? You know, it's a no-brainer as far as I'm concerned. But like Peter said straight from the offset, the devil will be in the detail. And we haven't got the detail at the moment. And unless we go forward with this, we won't get the detail. So, yeah, that's all I wanted to say, Chair. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Councillor Latham. Right then, I think that one item on the agenda has had good discussion and good debate here today. So if I could, the report is for decision. So if we can go to the recommendation on page 12 of the Cabinet Papers. Do I have a proposer?
Yes, I'll propose that, Chair.
And do we have a seconder?
I'll second.
All those against the proposal, if they wish to raise their hands, can do so now. I don't see anything, so that recommendation has passed, is carried.
Chair, just to let you know, apologies, that recommendation is going to Cabinet as well for decision after this meeting.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Charlotte. Right, if we go on to number 5, which is urgent items, I have none. And just to close, I thank you all for your attendance at the meeting today. And I thank my Vice Chair and the officers for doing a wonderful job on what was my first joint Cabinet Street Scene meeting. And I thank you all very much for your patience and your indulgence today. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Well done.
Thanks, Chair.
The meeting is closed.
Thank you.